Welcome to the future of solar photovoltaics. My name is Vikram Kumar of Ventus Limited. We've been going for about 3 years now since young Matthews and Arcus of JA Solar gave us the idea to start a podcast to communicate with the industry. Today, I've got the absolute pleasure of welcoming Mr. Doug Krause, President and founder of RUTE SunTracker, to our podcast. Doug, welcome.
Vikram, thank you very much. It's an honor. I've enjoyed your podcast in the past, and it's an honor to be on one.
Fantastic. Our podcast is being listened to in 99 countries. It is a non-profit activity to allow engineers and practitioners and developers and any stakeholders in the utility scale solar business to communicate with each other. And a big part of the industry is compliance and credibility, because there's $3 trillion worth of solar installed worldwide, approximately, and there's a pipeline of another 72 terawatts in the next 24 years. And so there's regular boom and bust cycles in the industry. So knowing who you deal with is half of the battle. So do you want to start us off by giving us a flavor of your early life and background?
I grew up in small towns in the Midwest of the U.S. and Indiana. Moved to Michigan, went to college there for mechanical engineering. And then in the 90s, I lived in a small cabin in Alaska. I was commercial fishing for about a decade. And the funny thing about that, compared to where I am now, I had solar on the roof back in the early 90s, and then we burned coal for heat. And I've all enjoyed burning coal, and it wasn't until like about a decade later that the coal and the solar were in that competition, which is where we're just at right now, kind of neck and neck.
Wow, and in terms of education and career history, are you able to give us a bit more detail?
In 86, I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. In 84, our University of Michigan, is associated with the car companies, and back then was really well funded. It's a really good mechanical engineering school. About a third of my co-students all came from Persian and Iraqi and Chaldean communities that are
Wow.
all part of Western Detroit. It's like the highest population of Arabic speakers and all people from that part of the Mideast. So I had a lot of time, a lot of fun. It's kind of a bummer today because I had so many really good relationships with these smart, funny people, and then the way you see how that's all portrayed now, it just completely doesn't jive. But we'll get past all that, I think. Not meaning to get into the politics, but it is kind of ironic that the energy, mid from the Mid East is part and parcel of why we're looking at so much solar in the grid in the future.
I'm friends with a very charismatic Italian guy called Mr. Valerio Polizzi from Rome. He spent his career in London. He still lives here. And we did a 2-hour podcast with him on the future of solar photovoltaics, or agrivoltaics rather. He's growing peppers behind solar panels because the Italian sun is too intense for direct sunlight on peppers. And I just jokingly said, "What happens if the Strait of Hormuz closes down? What will happen to the industry?" And I just said this as a joke, and it must be a curse or something. And so, in energy and war, it's an inseparable thing. And I myself, I've never said this on the podcast because I'm a host just to be a cop out about not saying anything about myself. But even though I'm from an Indian background, I was born in Afghanistan, so the politics follows us around. We can't help it.
I know it's wild. It's wild, and as we were talking earlier, that's such a small world. So then when you take this kind of like this whole planetary thing going on, and then mix it with essentially a very small network of people, and a lot of oil and gas people are all crossbred in with the solar and wind. And now batteries. It's such a hodgepodge now, and I think we're getting past the point where people talk about clean energy or renewable energy. You don't really need adjectives anymore. It's cheaper and it's all energy. And now it's a job for everybody to, you know, put a grid together that helps people live.
Well, I got into solar in the year 2008-9 time, not because I was trying to be a lefty loony and what Trump would say woke or anything like that, but because the credit crunch shut down typical industry, the car plants, the construction sector was shut down, and I was watching Bloomberg to see where else we could get work, and solar was the up and coming thing. And even Shell themselves say that solar is going to be the largest source of energy in the future, and we've
Yeah.
got the world's first trillionaire from electric cars. So for
Isn't that
me,
wild?
EVs is a yeah, EVs is a very tiny part of the energy sector. If to give you an idea, in the UK we use 300 terawatts of electricity, 1600 terawatt hours of primary energy, and only about 1 terawatt of that you would need to charge 30 million EVs, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is the mainstream now. But before we go deep into solar, do you want to speak a bit more about your career history and experience, and what prepared you for this moment in your career?
In the winters of the early 90s when I was commercial fishing, I would take winters and go work with a German tensile membrane structure contractor. So we put up structures in Morocco, all over Spain and Europe. And that's where I got my cable chops. So you mix that field experience of being a industrial, say, rigger with the mechanical engineering. That was essentially the basis, the foundational part of what RUTE SunTracker is all about, bringing the cable systems to the cable structural systems of solar. So now that's spanning 30 years. In between the two, started raising a family, end up with 4 kids, moved to Portland, Oregon, and started an engineering career just because working on boats and taking care of mothers-in-law and stuff. So we started our life really in Oregon and ended up in 2010 working with a French developer. And I learned a lot about solar project finance, wind uh, development, supply chains, EPC contracts. The French company is really, really good with teaching the whole team about, all the sausage factory part of solar projects and wind projects. And, and I'm really grateful to that. So then in 2015, I started my own company in structural solutions for wind and solar.
Mhm.
My son and I, in 2011, put together the first SunTracker prototype out of pizza boxes and dental floss. This
Wow.
was in the backyard. That was when solar was, just so, a different order of magnitude in terms of cost. I was in utility scale wind and we were competing with uh, market, there was no feed-in tariffs in the US. You get a little tax incentive, but we're dealing with wholesale power markets. And I could see the trend in solar, but I was thinking we're maybe 20, 30 years off, but it was coming down pretty quick. And I couldn't figure out why nobody was doing cables. It just makes, having come from European companies innovating in cable structures. If you're going to build a structure and you're dealing with wind forces, there's just no better way to deal with that than cables. And then once you do that, if you've solved the structural issue, the mechanics, it doesn't matter how high you go. So that was kind of the how that all started out back in 2011. We put the little prototype in just because I thought, oh, this should be obvious. I wanted to figure out why it wasn't obvious, why, a German or a Chinese company or something wasn't already doing that. A year or two later, a couple companies started coming out with like suspended cable systems over canals, things like that. And then in 2021, at that point, our company was doing its thing, but we didn't have a solar structural solution. And the price of solar had gotten almost more competitive than just about anything else. So I knew that we'd be in a good position to commercialize what we were thinking about. So that's when we got the patents and developed a few projects of our own to demonstrate it. I know I skipped over like a decade and a half there.
That's fine. There is no sort of a script here. We just want to get to know you and then let everyone listen to your experience because that's how we learn. I think storytelling is the quintessential human art form in how we communicate with each other. And every time you say cable, I was trying not to interrupt because I'm pretty sure you don't mean electrical cables. You mean mechanical cables to come up with foundations for different PV structural solutions. And I think even though we both speak English, American English is a bit different. So, what do you exactly mean by cables? Do you want to elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, thanks for making that point because we have a problem with that one too. So we call s- cables with wire with copper and aluminum that um, conduct electricity. We call those wires just to keep it straight on our end. And then cables, we're just for our nomenclature because we don't have a better term for it for structural cables. And structural cables are guy wires you see tying back utility poles. Um, this other round wire rope you see holding up bridges for suspended bridges. It's all same class, same kind of stuff.
Right. Okay. So massive mechanical cables that hold up bridges and pylons for utility poles and stadium roofs and stuff like that. And how is that different from regular mechanical foundations that people use, like the steel and aluminium that goes in?
And you're referring to solar or just anything?
I'm referring to solar because I think your idea is to use cables to have very high mounted agrivoltaic structures. I did have a brief read of your website. I wanted to do a bit more research, but I wasn't able to because England were playing in the World Cup late last night.
Yeah, isn't that wild? That was wild. Holy moly.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so, so I think the best way to jump into, well, can I jump into the market side first, just to kind of give a picture where I think this is headed?
absolutely.
I think what happened after we got a USDA and Department of Energy in the US grants to show that you could do this. We went through three successful stages because each time we got a grant, said we're going to do this, we turn out we did it. And it
Hmm.
worked out better than we thought. We piloted it in a very windy location in North Dakota,
Hmm.
and then a job in Oregon, and then finally this commercial job we just finished in Southern Oregon on a ranch. And now that one's got cattle running around under it. The cattle love it. The grass is growing great. And so what we found was that that it works. The ranchers would otherwise be paying for shade in most places where there are cattle and on in the world. And the structure didn't cost that much to put up. Now
Right.
what's that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mean the structures to actually mount the modules where you graze cattle rather than having barns or whatever you would have to shade them against the sun, right?
Yeah, the shading, the shade for the from the perspective of, let's call it what the people are either calling cattle voltaics, cattle solar, agrivoltaics. If you start out with a ranch and they all have all their pastures, however they decide to graze them, whatever their management plan is, typically they a rancher would prefer more shade than they get.
Right.
Um, so, and sometimes they'll pay for it. So if you could put shade structures out in a farmer's or a rancher's pastures for free, for example, they would say, "Yeah, please go do that." Especially, can you put them around my fields where each time of the day, wherever they happen to be, like we're going to graze over there in 2 weeks, I need some water infrastructure over there and some shade. So uh, the symbiosis with elevated solar and ranching is it's not understated. It's just completely a giant market that's not being tapped right now. In fact, you really wouldn't even need cheap hardware to accomplish that because a rancher Well, I'm not going to say do it for free because if you're offering them $1,000 an acre a year for the rent, you know, but they are out there putting shade up anyway.
Yep.
It's, and so,
It's very political, the competition between land and solar, and there's a lot of misinformation out there where people almost advertise or protest against solar as competing with land. And I remember seeing a brief LinkedIn short video from yourself, which piqued my interest after you got in contact with us, that you had cows running beneath your modules, and I've never seen that in my life before. You know, we've seen sheep running under panels and people having cabbage.
yeah,
We've never seen cows running beneath panels.
yeah. Well, okay. So this gets back to your initial question that I went off
Yeah.
on all these different tangents, which is
Hmm.
if you think about 1840s and what the English people figured out with these cutty sarks, and they're taking these boats to Australia. I can't remember how fast they were going or how long it took them, but they were moving. And those boats had, let's just say, in comparison to what we're doing today with our structures, you take a wooden mast, 80 feet tall, about 20 times the, let's call it canvas area, and they're tied back with hemp rope. So then our big challenge 175 years later is to have a 20th of the canvas area, 13 feet tall, with steel cables. It's just not like it should not be a mind bender that you can't restrain something from being blown away using effectively sail rigging.
You've been doing this for almost 11 years now. What has been your journey like from the startup years to till now? Do you have any example of projects you've worked on so far, in terms of financial models, the feedback from the industry?
Well, we've just commercialized our cattle solar product last fall. So this is
Okay,
brand new for us.
right.
Before then, I was an engineer, construction manager for a regular, you know, large scale utility
Hmm.
developing projects.
Fantastic. So, how long have you been doing solar? How did you exactly get into solar? I may have missed it if you've said it already.
I was hired by a French company to be
Oh,
a
you did.
civil engineer.
Yes, yes, you did mention that. Yeah, we have a strong French influence in the UK as well. There's a heavy involvement from our EDF and
Yeah,
EPCs from France, called Equans and also Voltalia. So yeah, sorry, you did say that earlier.
it's okay.
And
Yeah. A lot of the people that worked well, my boss was from Total, who
oh
was
well.
in oil and gas before, and
Hmm.
then Total became, I don't know what, are they Engie or like this?
Total is still Total. I think I always butcher the French pronunciations, but we still have Total Energies, and they are very involved in Asia from my network. I know
Yeah.
they are also somehow involved in the UK as well. There's also involvement from Shell who buy PPAs or power purchase agreements. So, but because of the nature of these projects, because they're so large, often most of the battle is getting information because people want to keep it under their hats,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in order to not advertise to competitors what they're doing. You just need one person to start complaining, and your site can go on hold.
Well, you want to know something kind of, I shouldn't be saying this is, but I'm more of like an open source type of, hey, let's make the world a better place kind of person. Um, and I think there's a humongous market worldwide for ranchers to figure out where they want solar on their land and have a greenfield developer, like old school, landman kind of person or landwoman, and figure out what they want, what matches their ranch best. And as long as there's some transmission lines nearby them, you basically take that to the IPPs because the IPPs don't want their fingerprints on the project at the beginning anyway.
Mhm.
And then you start a project out where the ranch says, in the ideal, here's where I want the shade. And it will bring me some extra infrastructure like misting, watering stations, fencing, animal controls, all these different things. And the two pair together so well that there should be an industry of of essentially land development people that work directly with ranchers and create the perfect facility. And then we can just bypass this whole discussion of like how hey, the insurers don't want to insure something because the IPP and their IE doesn't want, they don't want to mix and match too much. But if the opportunity was presented to them where, well, this electricity is going to cost you less and people are going to
Yeah.
compete for it, then what's going to happen is the insurers are going to figure out a way to insure it.
Absolutely. I'm also an open source guy as well. I'm doing a lot of open source work. I'll be spending 90% of my last 60 days on building software because AI has unlocked a capability which I never knew I could access. You
Yeah.
can write in plain English what you want, and it converts your experience into actual code. And then even now, as I'm talking to you, I've got 4 agents on Linux searching the internet, executing scripts I've been writing over the last 60 days. They're executing over 200 scripts. So in the age of AI, people say using data centers is unethical. My daughter may have mentioned that before, and I said, but we're using data centers to work towards net zero. So in terms of for yourself, have you had? You said last fall, which we call autumn in the UK. You launched the business last fall. Have you had a prototype project? Have you had a
Yep, that one's up
demonstrator?
and going.
How far along are we?
It's 120 kilowatts, it's 1 acre, half a hectare. It's operational. It's plugged into the Pacific Power Grid. That's a utility that's owned by Warren Buffett, and went through all the the permitting, all the stuff. So it's totally legit. Did wind studies with our national lab through a Department of Energy grant, and now I'm down in Georgia doing the second one. So the concept for us, as far as our go-to market, is to show that we can be coast to coast. We can get one permitted in
Hmm.
our in a hurricane zone. This is southern Georgia, so that's hurricane territory,
Wow. Hmm.
and demonstrate that wherever the cow's at, the cattle solar is a good pairing with it. And it just
Fantastic.
coincides with next week. The Georgia Solar Farm Summit is a big event that's happening. So we'll be
Wow.
at that.
Wow. Okay. So are you looking to keep this technology in the US, or would you look to Europe or the UK or the Middle East where you've had experience before?
Well, it's funny when I saw the one that you did with Mr. Polizzi or Dr. Polizzi,
Yes.
right? And so part of, I guess it would be a quarter of our family, when they left Italy, they went to Argentina, and they used to
Wow.
come up and visit us.
Hmm.
They did better off down in Argentina than the Italians that ended up in Wisconsin. Or put it this way, they were more gung ho to travel. So when I was little, they'd come up and yeah, I mean, anywhere that there's cattle and you need some shade and electricity, I think you'll be seeing cattle solar. I think.
So with Valerio, I can send you his number. As I said, he's a very charismatic firework kind of guy, and is Mr. Valerio Polizzi because he has got his professional qualifications from Rome, but he's been almost from his beginning of his career. He's been working for UK companies. One was Ofgem, which is I think the energy regulator, and then he got into the big bad world of solar investments. The first one may have been Bluefield Solar Fund, which is listed on the London Stock Exchange,
Mhm.
recently acquired by Drax. I won't go into too much politics about that, but Drax have businesses in the US as well and in the UK. And Valerio, his family's from Italy. He works a lot in Italy. He works a lot in the US as well. Has very strong opinions. So immediately you can is someone I can introduce you to if it may be of interest to you to cooperate with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty wild world here in the next decade. It's going to be really, really wild.
It's wild already. I don't want to sound too negative and mention the horror stories, but imagine you've got 5 or 6 people in a company and they've been given access to $100 million. Well, what could possibly go wrong? And
Yeah.
so there are stories of people buying Bugattis and private jets and things. And but I think what I see from especially in my home market in the UK, because we've had this Brexit lag for over a decade, that we're going to have ginormous solar farms. And on the open source engine that I'm writing for the Global Grid 2050 project, which is a non-profit, completely available to anyone. People say think I'm crazy for keeping it non-profit, but there's a logistical reason behind it, because we're using enterprise-grade tools.
Yeah.
And if you commercialize too early, you have to pay for the API licenses. So if you
Yeah.
keep it
Yeah.
open, you can use it all the Linux servers for free. And what I can see on the software already, and the reason why I've not gone beyond the UK is because keep the data center cost free of charge, because you can put it all on GitHub repositories. Is what I see is the old coal power plants are shutting down, like it's almost going to zero, and it's opening up huge grid capacities on those nodes. And then those projects were dominated by typical companies like RWE, German energy companies, EDF, and others. And now they're going to be building huge solar farms in the UK. And now with data center coming as well, there's opportunity to do DC co-location with solar
Yeah.
and storage and data centers.
Yeah.
So the Wild West is pretty much in full speed from what I see. And I've
Yeah.
been doing solar for 14 years full time.
Yeah.
In the US, it must be even more crazy, because I've seen the numbers. There's been huge amounts of solar installed already in the US, and now there's going to be trade sanctions, and majority of the panels are made in China. What do you think will happen in the US market, and where do your highest priorities lie if you were to seek partners to progress your business?
Excellent question. So I'm not going to come across as energy exec type of person,
Hmm.
and I have a hard time speaking, more than like two syllable words. And
Hmm.
that whole architecture of project origination and grid stuff and working with utilities, and
Hmm.
there's such a heavy focus on, no offense at all, like the Wall Street mindset
Hmm.
and transactions. And my value is just not in talking about transactions. It's about infrastructure, and especially on this land side. So I think that's where my value and our company's value is going to be, is if the grid wants electricity that's as symbiotic or holistically planned as you could possibly get, and that in my mind would be a cattle ranch, then we can provide you by the gigawatt. So, and then you turn around and probably find people using AI infrastructure like yourselves to probably, help find those faster maybe. But that's really not a tough job. It's not like you know, it's not super intense. If you wanted to do a GIS of the US and find intersect transmission lines with ranch land, you one person could do that in a day or two. And but go ahead.
Absolutely. What I was going to say is, I've had a funny career, because I've got corporate work experience, having worked for Honeywell, a billion-euro German company called Lap in the past. I've been an agent for Leone, a 5 billion turnover company existing for almost 500 years in Germany. They used to make the gold wires for the Pope and textiles before they got into cabling. And one of the areas I've been quite lucky in is I've got my own small company, but I'm an agent for a larger company. Now I'm in the conversation with Delta Electronics, a Taiwanese headquartered power electronics specialist. They turn over probably up to $70 billion with 12,000 engineers. And the corporate thing you talk about is, I have enormous respect for people that can tolerate the pressure that comes with in that environment. And there is a constant power struggle between the old technology and the new technology. And when you change divisions or acquire companies, and there's mergers and acquisitions, there's always friction about who gets to keep their jobs, who gets which responsibilities. And while all of that's happening, no one's doing the work. And what's happening at the result is, and I've researched the US in detail as well, because my kids are grown up now. I've got dreams of driving around the US closing cable deals as well, but I don't want to just turn up and waste a load of money again
Yeah.
until I'm ready. The point being, these corporate companies are getting 10-year grid connection dates. And
Yeah.
what you would do historically with getting a decade to build a nuclear power plant, you can't have that in solar because it's a low margin industry. It thrives on speed, and the reason why we've got almost a white collar recession coming is because projects are not progressing, and if you can't progress the projects, you don't get your construction finance. So then you end up with 500 people without any work to do. And so we are in a stage, especially in the UK. I don't know what is happening in the US, and it may go in the same direction with all the sanctions and everything. Is that there is an issue with actual craftsmanship and skills, and the people that actually build things. And so that's important, but at the same time, we have to communicate to the lenders what our business plan is, where we need the funding, how what we are offering is better than what they've got, and then somehow finding someone that listens to us to be able to close the deal. So the communication element is very, very important. And
Yeah.
so have you done the numbers on what you're doing and how it's different to typical conventional tracking systems or fix tilt mounting structures?
Yeah. Yeah. I think our thesis is that cattle solar is cheaper. Do you guys use levelized cost of energy?
Yes,
Yeah.
LCOE, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. LCOE. So in a typical, no matter where you're on the planet,
Hmm.
you're spending about £1 million or $1 million or €1 million per megawatt to build a solar facility. Is that about right for you on your end?
Well, I can give you very specific numbers for the UK because I'm almost working like a key accounts manager, and my job is to keep an eye on who's who and
Yeah.
what they're doing. And if I give you the peak numbers, just to not get in trouble with my friends in the industry,
Yeah.
so the highest I've seen development done for from ground zero, just looking at Google Earth, drawing a square and hoping there's going to be solar there, from that stage to signing the EPC contract and getting the money to build the thing, it's been costing £200,000 a megawatt peak.
Wow,
Just
that's
to have a
cheap.
PDF, just to have a PDF file ready, and that was at its peak because of the extreme demand, and so that created an industry. Almost like subprime mortgages. It created an industry where there are too many developers
Yeah.
because without picking up a single shovel, you can get £200,000 and you times that by 1.36 for US dollars just for getting the site prepared. And this wasn't done by corporate, this was done by small developers. So you had ethical developers who do things properly, you have independent power producers who do things properly, but majority of people, they saw this as a massive Vegas thing and just spammed grid applications because you could, if you're holding a vital asset and land nearby where solar can go on it, then you would sell it for 200 grand a megawatt and you might spend a fraction of that. But the failure rate has surprised a lot of people, and the result in the UK, because it's a small island grid, is that we've got now probably 700 gigawatts of applications, and National Grid, which also does the grid in the east coast of the US. Keep in mind there are three financial centers of the world: Tokyo, London, and New York. Two of those are managed by National Grid UK,
Mhm.
and National Grid now has the task to basically cancel the grid connections that can't show progression. They
Yeah.
want to see, where's your grid connection plan, where's your earthing studies, where's your geotechnical surveys, where are your supply agreements, how are you going to get it all together, where's your milestones. You need to deliver 300 milestones from start to finish, and then if you miss the milestones, no cash, it's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what's going on in the UK now. We call it a developer bloodbath.
Yeah. I think we got the same thing. I think there's different mechanics going on as how the the queue is putting the squeeze on people to shake money out of them or whatnot. Um, but just on the downstream side, if just for some ballpark numbers, if you get the project built for whatever it is, uh, let's say your revenue for a 100 megawatt project is $10 million a year, or 10 million euros, something around there. That'd be a PPA price of around 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Um, if that's if 20% of that is your vegetation management, or 10% ish of your OPEX, operational expenses, vegetation management, and your land rent to essentially take over a whole giant area of land, especially if land is dear in a place like England, you're on an island. And if you completely occupy, take food production away, you've got a strategic issue all of a sudden. So you would expect that the land price pairing with ranching would be lower, your vegetation management's lower. With our particular variety, we don't pile drive, we don't bulldoze, we don't have to restore the land because we don't mess it up in the first place. Cables are really good with undulating ground. So for all of those, let's call it capital expense and operation expense savers, then the extra cost you'd have to spend for our higher thing, which isn't much, it's almost nominal, you end up with a lower price of electricity. That's effectively our business thesis, one project in. 2 years ago, it was when we were more in USDA and Department of Energy grant land. That was a concept. Can we do that? There's no way you can get competitive on, price of electricity with cattle solar.
Yeah.
And, I could say, I could sandbag a little bit, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, you can beat that cattle solar is the cheapest way to go. I'm pretty sure about that.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of great people in this industry, which is why I've stuck with it for so long and made so many great friends. And if you do the numbers, there aren't enough people around for how many solar terawatts there is to deploy. There aren't enough cable factories on the electrical side, not
Yeah,
which you will go
yeah, yeah.
wire to provide any enough capacity for the medium and high voltage connections. And I think the biggest challenge is the gatekeeping that people face, because the incumbents are very powerful, and everyone would defend their turf. We don't have middle ages war anymore, but energy is, you are going and stepping on
Well, hold
people's
on.
toes.
So I have a question for you because honestly,
Yes,
I've been wanting to run into somebody like you that I could ask these
yes,
two questions. One of them
absolutely.
is, it, what about the aluminum copper? Are we gonna, for all of that cables that you sell, do we have the mines to and refineries, smelters to produce that amount of metal?
Problem is not the metal. The problem is uh, you need huge capex to produce a cable factory. The lines are very, very long, and they can't produce fast enough for the demand that's coming. One, two, uh, even if you can produce the high voltage cables, it's a highly regulated environment. If you knock out the power grid for Wall Street or for the UK, you could collapse the global economy. So, installing a project in a place like the UK at 400 kV is not a joke, because it's highly, highly regulated. And so, to do the specification work, to put together a connection for a 400 kV joint or a 132 kV joint, and it'd be similar voltages in the US, you're looking at 2 years of arguments with the power utilities, with the consultants. And then when you go to ask for the quotation for the connection accessories, one which I did in Holland last year at 110 kV for a company called Ampere Solar Europe, the connectors were 100 kilograms each, and the lead time on them is almost 2 years.
Yeah,
And these are accessories parts that don't cost the same as $10,000 each. They need eight of them, six for the connection, two for spares. People don't realize when they close finance and they need to connect to the grid that there's a 2 year wait for the high voltage connection equipment. And in those 2 years, you've got laborers standing on the ground, and they did no work to do because you haven't got a solid connection. So the
yeah.
cash flow taps turn off because the banks worry that they are issuing money to a project that will just be a money pit. So it's an enormous environment. I won't go too deep into that because I've spent my life on this. I started as a youngster, as a dropout law school student, and now I'm 43, and all I've done is cables and solar pretty much all my career. You asked earlier about numbers. I gave you the development peak for the UK. For the EPC market, I would say about 50 pence. So times about 1.36. So say
Yeah.
$70 cents a watt for EPC, which I think is too low. So development, you got 20. Let's just pretend it's dollar cents. The numbers we can adjust. It's
Hmm.
all changing with Iran now anyway.
Yeah.
So So you got $20 cents for development, and you got $50 cents for EPC in the UK, roughly. That's 70 cents. But the project net present value, how much you sell the project for, and this is public record. You can go on the London Stock Exchange, run an AI script on Bluefield and Next Energy and Foresight Capital. These are funds that you can buy shares in. The project values are about 1.36 million pounds a megawatt.
Yeah.
That's so when it's all in, all said and done. So the reason why people are paying 20 cents for development and 50 cents for EPC is because they double their money when they sell the project.
Yeah.
The risk is the gap in between where you need the money without backing to develop the project to a stage where it's just shovel ready, or some people call RTB, ready to build. And when it's
Yeah.
ready to build, you've got an asset that people auction for. That's how high the demand is.
Yeah. Yeah. That tracks with what's going on here. Maybe a little. It's about the same. I think I've heard utility scale solar in Australia is cheaper. In the US, Texas is now becoming, I mean, they're so flooded with utility scale wind and solar, you'd think they'd be kind of tapped. But whenever anybody thinks that, Texas has just got a different culture. When I first started in wind and solar, well, it was mainly wind then in 2010, 11, we went
Mm-hmm.
through our first episode, and I was developing a project in Texas and New Mexico, and it was ERCOT regions. Uh, the um, the grid was supposed to only be able, or the established high voltage transmission line was only supposed to be able to handle like 20 gigawatts of wind, and we were just bumping up into that. I think they're up to like 95 or 100 gigawatts of wind installed. So what's happened in ERCOT, every couple of years, they they fill up the wires with intermittent wind, and then they go build a bunch of transmission lines. I think it's kind of a joke almost, or it's not a joke, but it's compared to the rest of the U.S., this stuff just appears overnight. Like $15 billion of electricity of high voltage transmission will go up. I think they've tripled, something like that, the amount of high voltage transmission that the rest of the US has built in the last 20 years. It's
Didn't Texas have a grid collapse with the Great Freeze or something like that?
They did, and it's funny. That's another problem we have as a society. I think
Mm-hmm.
it comes back metaphorically in my mind to this clipper ship thing,
Mm-hmm.
where people did it. They built it and they sailed to Australia to go sell. So I can't even
Yeah.
remember what you guys were. The commodity that they built those ships to move from England to Australia for was something really silly. It's like
Yeah.
ballpoint pens or something like that. Not really, but uh, it just shows you the amount of risk and vision and connection to the physical world and all the hard stuff you do to make a buck. Whereas nowadays, the first thing anybody talks about when you look at the massive, like, order of magnitude level of success of Texas versus most other places in our grid, first thing somebody will refer to is the couple of freezes they've had. And in both of those cases, they had specs. The regulations was for the winterization was this, and then they had a couple of events that just froze all the gas pipes, and that's really what happened. The gas went down, and then a couple of wind plants also froze up because they didn't need glycol in their cooling or something. So a couple of wind plants went down, but the majority of their issues was the natural gas systems. Pipes just came above ground and froze.
Wow.
They fixed all that.
Of
And it's
course.
funny, it's all published. There's exposés about that, but
Mm-hmm.
nobody seems to be able to connect the dot. Like, that was a blip, technical blip, it got fixed. But look how many gigawatts of success story we got, why Texas is thriving and so many new things are happening. Yeah.
Well, in COVID time, we put the whole world into a lockdown, so it's amazing what people do when they are motivated by a reason or a fear or whatever. And Texas is an interesting story because it's historically a red state, if I'm forgotten, and it's normally you would associate Texas with oil and gas and cowboys and and the fact that Texas is installing so much solar and wind, that in itself shows you, that this isn't a woke or greenwashing technology. A lot of people do use it for greenwashing. Let's not get this wrong, because it allows you to carry on trading oil for a bit longer because you've got a net zero plan until they fire the CEO and go back to oil again because everyone needs it. Because of the state of affairs as it is. So, everyone can greenwash all they like. Most of our industry runs on fossil fuels because, as you mentioned, agriculture, a lot of the animal feed comes from fossil fuel derived sources. Most of the land in the UK is used not for houses or roads, it's used for growing animal feed for livestock.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you want to talk about just that for a second?
Absolutely, and I wanted to also probe your mind about GIS as well because that's where we're getting into now. Because you'd be amazed how little land you need to actually do solar. But yeah, of course, we are
Well,
onto
go
this topic. So
do the GIS first. Let's hear about that.
the GIS is simple economics and geography. So we built this financial sandbox tool, not for bankers. Bankers can use it, but they have fancier tools than us. They have Bloomberg subscriptions for $40,000 a year or whatever. They've got all the dashboards. But the point is, it's for average people that actually want to construct things, build a picture. And so this Global Grid 2050 atlas that we're building, we did then variants of that where you can go and actually use geodesic mathematics to measure the curvature of Earth and run transmission lines all over the place. And then I thought, can we measure the actual acreage you need to build a solar farm? And how much space do you actually need? So we've put the actual measurements in. So you type how many megawatts of solar you want for the entire region, and it doesn't even cover a small square on the whole of England.
Yeah,
It covers the space the size of central London. So if you wanted to, and you put solar on all the coastal regions, which has high tides and land below sea level, that in itself will be more than enough to have all the solar you need in the summer.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I get it. So yeah, it's funny the our particular version of that is good for flooded areas, and that's
Hmm.
so yeah, that's cool. I am
We
a
have that.
GIS guy
So
too.
So the largest solar farm in the UK is called Cleve Hill Solar Farm, 373 megawatts DC,
Yeah,
280 megawatts AC export at 400 kV. And because it's public information, it's on Google Earth. Anyone can go and have a look. It's around 1,000 acres. It has
yeah.
a 4 meter sea defense wall because the whole region was reclaimed probably from the sea, from the North Sea. So yeah, do you want to talk about your GIS experience and how that helps you in your current business?
When I was up in Alaska and we started having kids, you got to get creative if you're fishing 6 months a year or whatnot. So I was doing some land surveying,
Hmm.
staking out all kinds of stuff. Uh, and that's where, and then I learned GIS as a result of that. So then when I became a engineer for the French company, I already had my GIS stuff and civil infrastructure work up in Alaska, and then had the mechanical.
Feel free to use the platform to push your agenda forward. So we don't do like advertising or anything like that, but because you're giving up your time, it's
Yeah,
only fair that you get to promote yourself, and then any inquiries I get for your business, I'll just forward to you.
yeah. Well, Root Foundation Systems Inc., we're a US C Corp, and we got two divisions, one in wind and one in solar.
Hmm.
Both of them use uh, cables as part of the support structure. So what you would call on the solar world, you'd call that balance of structural system,
Hmm.
and that's what we provide. So if you had a 100 megawatt solar project and you wanted to put that over cattle pasture and not worry about bulldozing or trenching or pile driving,
Hmm.
then when you when you got your EPC, the EPC would essentially receive what we call fields, and one field is about a megawatt and a half DC, and and that's got a perimeter of structures that create this cable trellis. And then each one of those fields, if you want 150 megawatts, you buy 100 field kits, and then the EPC contractor would be trained up at our headquarters in the southeast of the U.S. and learn how to basically become a rigger. That's probably the biggest news that I think our patented innovation brings to the world. I think we're pretty fresh. In other words, I think we're a new thing. There are other cable systems out there. Um, so
I
what were you?
absolutely, I absolutely believe you that what you have is innovative because just it has to be seen to be believed. I have seen your videos with cows running beneath the solar panels, and I don't know if that was even possible. When people talk about agrivoltaics, it's almost like greenwashing. You got cabbages on the farm, and then you got 2 kilowatts of solar panels suspended. I look at it and I laugh because I've been doing this for 22 years. I could tell immediately the power density of something, especially to do with solar. And I can even calculate the cables off the top of my head, how much current they'll carry and what the power will be, and so on. But the point being, if we've got access to a huge investor base and EPC base, because we network with them once a month. I'm trying to change it to once a quarter because I don't want to become an alcoholic, or I'll just stick to soda and water now and pretend it's gin and tonic. The point is I drink too much beer and end up doing stupid stuff, but that's
Yeah.
a side story. The thing here is, if someone wants to work with you on large solar projects, how do you convince them on bankability? Like, where do you do the manufacturing? How do you assure them of supply, of cash flows, things like that? Are you looking for funders? I'm trying to basically paint a picture of where you are and how we can support you in our
Yeah.
network.
We're just getting going. We're a tiny team running on project cash flow. We don't, we're not against capital to run a business. That's normally how you do it.
Yep.
Um, but because we can build projects and cash flow them and pay ourselves, we're, I think, as basically as bootstrapped as you can possibly be. So getting a couple larger projects in a pipeline would be a great thing. If an IPP wanted to stress test my claim that there's ranchers out there that could provide a gigawatt project, we can act as the landman effectively because we talk to a lot of ranchers, and then
Right.
somebody can take an option. Let's say if that project happens, and that would be one way for us to check those boxes you're referring to. Is it scalable?
Mhm.
Is it in demand? Does a rancher really go along with this? Does the county permit it?
So your
So
route to market is basically you've got a relationship with ranchers and farmers. You can identify sites which maybe need grid connections and have land that requires solar photovoltaics. And by introducing that project, you can then bring that to a funder. And so you're almost self-financing your projects because you're creating opportunities in terms of project origination.
that is definitely, unless somebody like yourself or somebody
Mhm.
else that's smarter comes along and says, hey, that's a dumb way to do it. Just go get a bunch of VC money and show
Mhm.
them your tracker, you know, pitch deck or something.
Mhm.
The problem is that now you're getting into a world where you're competing with tracker hardware, which is just so low margin, and
Mhm.
we're dealing with a whole different universe of, let's say,
Mhm.
premium, dual land use, more grass, more shade. It's just such a different, it's just such a different universe. And on top of that is uh, greenfield development is really valuable. It's like really
Mhm.
one of the hardest things to do
Yes.
properly.
Yes. Absolutely.
So
And you have a big advantage. You're an engineer yourself. You got GIS experience. You got a long career of practical execution skills. You know various different markets. So if you're bringing projects, that changes the whole conversation. because I'm also in a similar kind of situation. I prefer to
Hmm.
sell just wires, which you call wires, which I call cables,
Hmm.
because to us cables are if you got a bunch of wires in a sheath, we call that a
Oh, right,
cable.
right, 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 right.
Or some wires we call the individual strands of the conductor. So, we are in the IEC world. You guys are more American wire gauge. If that's to do
Yeah,
with British wire gauge, I don't know, but I'm a history geek as well. So the point being, if you're bringing project origination, then we can introduce you to funders, to EPCs, to other structure manufacturers. Because what I'm doing right now is, doing a lot of product development, because there's solar's not a secret anymore. Everyone knows about it. There's
yeah,
$3 trillion worth, and that's like the GDP of the UK. So everyone knows about solar. People drop their pants on margins, sell at negative margin just to get in.
it's
As a
crazy.
loss,
I know.
as a
I see.
so if you're not doing some kind of value add or solution sales, you just get kicked out of the market. It's as simple as that. So for me, the in the last 14 years of solar experience, the most valuable person is the person that brings deals and brings the projects. Then you hold the golden key and you choose who you want to share it with, as long as you can prove that you've got grid, you've got land, and you've progressed the project to a certain level where it's differentiated from someone just drawing a square on Google Earth.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you there, and I think so. That's what we'll. I spend a lot of time going to cattlemen's association shows,
Hmm.
ag conventions, and there's a lot of developers that go to those too. And now we've got the solar farm, uh, uh, the solar farm summit. The first Georgia version of it coincides with us getting the building permit last week, and the convention's next week. So it's got some really big time people. Will Harris is there. It's going to be really cool. We'll see what happens after that.
Fantastic. There's a few people I would like to introduce you to who have shipped structures to many hundreds of countries around the world. They are very well established, and they are the big players in this game from Spain. So I can introduce you to these people, and if you're bringing projects, they could be potential partners for you in the US on how to deploy your technology in
Yeah.
the fastest possible time. So what I'll do at the end of this podcast is I'll send you a list of names, their web addresses, their phone numbers. You can WhatsApp them straight away, speak directly. You don't need to keep me in the loop. You can refer to the podcast if it helps you, and you can get involved straight away. There's also other people that have been on the podcast already that are very active with US partners. For Valeria, we already mentioned, but the other one is Clive Cosby,
Mhm.
who was a quantity surveyor. He's been on every major solar farm in the UK. He's worked in Myanmar on massive projects in Portugal. Now he's working with an Arizona-based partner who does module handling technology, because at Cleve Hill Solar Farm they have 5 modules in portrait. Like, can you imagine what that looks
Wow.
like?
Wow.
So there's an east-west system, 5 in portrait this way, 5 in portrait this way, and they are like 40 kilogram modules, Trino modules, 650 watt peak. So the problem with that you've got is a safety at height issue, because if you're more than 5 meters up in the sky, how do you put a solar panel there? And how do you put 500,000 of them there? And so after Clive learned this problem with health and safety issues, he got into a franchise or something to that effect, an agency with an Arizona-based company that has those Caterpillar, or what's the equivalent in America? Those big
Yeah.
JCB kind of vehicles,
Yeah.
and they have this suction arm on the end that could pick up these modules, rotate the 2 meter tall pallets because they weigh over a ton. There's people being crushed to death with these things because if you've got low skilled labor and they're unloading 1 ton pallets and thousands of pallets. So 300 megawatt solar farm needs a small container ship's worth of modules, to give you an idea. And
Oh
this you
yeah.
can see on a GIS platform of how many ships you need to ship 300 megawatts, for example. So Clive is someone you should speak to because you got immediate contacts into Arizona, but also into the UK.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So when we first started putting these on paper,
Yeah.
there was usually 80% people would, that'll never work.
Hmm.
And I knew from just rigging and wind forces, it'll work, pencils out.
Yeah.
The question was how was it going to work and how you were going to put it up without
Yeah.
killing people because we are 4 meters up,
Oh wow.
so
Okay.
that's just like what you're talking about. And we build the whole truss on the ground and do the wiring and then roll it out on this little robotic trolley. And we invented this little lift system so that nobody's under it, two pins, and then you're done and out of there. And then nothing else has to be done in the field. So there's a pre-assembly tent where your flatbeds would deliver all the metal, all the PV, and all your cables or wires, and then everything goes through a little assembly line. And that's effectively needed to happen because we're these 30 feet, 10 meters each unit. It's got three in landscape and then four, whatever, 12. It's about 7 kilowatts per what we call a bloom.
Fantastic. Well, as we've come towards the end, what I will definitely do is make a comprehensive list of contacts, and I'll send those to you. And if you need me to make a formal introduction to anyone that's interesting for you, I can certainly do that. Hopefully, we'll get to meet in person soon as well. But from your perspective, do you want to close by speaking about what you think the future of solar is in the next 5 years and beyond, and what kind of people do you hope to work with to bring this technology to the market?
I think the future for PV is just like you were saying, it's off the charts.
Hmm.
Uh, the the data center part of it, I think should just be looked at as an asset. If they're going to get their electricity one way or the other, and if they come and put a data center where they can get electricity, whether it's wind, offshore wind, or solar, it just takes the heat off the grid in the first place. So they're just effectively a new grid almost. They're that scale,
Hmm.
or I mean, a new utility. And then whatever they have in excess when they're not doing their computing is going to then go on the regular, everybody else's grid. I just think that's where that's headed. In terms of agrivoltaics and cattle solar, I think both of them are going to be, again, off the charts, not to the terawatt level you're talking about for, say, cabbages, because we're in the kind of Cambrian explosion phase of ag solar. Find out where it works best, how big you can do it. But pastures is a different story. That kind of, in my mind, jumps the line of everybody just because so far I can't think of anything that's as symbiotic. And when I mean symbiotic, what I mean that literally, like you get more grass, cooler cows, and more water, retained water. So all the things that the ranch is looking for to make more money or have more stocking density, more beef production per hectare, they get effectively for free. And likewise, the solar is probably, that's just spitball, I'm not 100% sure, but you're going to get probably 2% extra revenue in your thermal efficiency gain from having cooler panels. And then your bifacial gain, because you're up 4 meters, is,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So in both cases, now the one business has made the other business more profitable, and the cattle business has made the solar business more profitable. That's a pretty cool thing to be able to not just, there's zero greenwashing. Nobody in the either group is not talking about how many credits they're going to sell or whatnot. Like
Yes.
you basically you wouldn't even waste your time with credits. Soil building credits or whatnot. Just forget about that. You're talking about bottom line stuff.
One of the things I really love, and this is detailed stuff for later, is the bifaciality. Now, I was into solar recently, and there's module companies out there talking about 90% bifaciality. That's the theoretical maximum. You won't see that in real life. With grass, you may get higher bifaciality than with just dark ground of some description. And if you've got snow on the ground, you can get
Yeah.
maximum, close to maximum bifaciality from a few seconds, which is enough to blow up your transformers. So that in itself is an interesting area. But of course, yeah, if you have a 4 meter tall structure, you are going to get more bifaciality from incident light, and also if your ground is grass and not and the panels are not too low, you will improve the yield. And the question will be demonstrating that in financial models and getting involved in the actual deals, and I think that's where all the action is going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And fine for us, honestly, it's built putting stuff up. We
Hmm.
could put something up in, Oxford, England is a bit of a center for agrivoltaics and the climate there. Why go to Oxford? Well, because if you wanted to find out what your bifacial gain at 4 meters is,
Yeah.
I could have a hectare of our stuff up, and you could be getting actual data in about 2 months from now. You know, so rather than screwing around with studies, no offense, but just build it first and then have some actual data to look at instead of theoretically.
So this Clive, who was one of our early podcasts, will be very interesting for you because he's very much action, straight demonstrating on solar farms. He's got the contacts to the builders as well. And in Oxford, you'll be amazed when you look at our GIS tool. You'll see solar farms that are operating already, wind farms that are operating, batteries. You'll also see conventional projects, heavy energy users. But what's most amazing is, it would be nonsensical to talk about the future of solar photovoltaics without showing people the real numbers. And
Yeah.
so there are now between 300 to 800 megawatt peak solar farms in planning in Oxfordshire and beyond. So if you and the details of these developers are public, it's also on our platform. So if you speak to these people and you could demonstrate a saving, it could be several multiples when it comes to a project of that magnitude. If you get involved early, you might be 3 years away from seeing anything. But if you get involved towards the financial close, then all the specs are already fixed. So it's a chicken and egg situation where you get involved, but of course you make your own luck. The activity will result in conversations that hopefully will lead to business for you.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Yeah, well, in relation to that other comment, like who's the people we need to talk to next? In the next year or two, regional demonstration projects are the way to go, and those are behind the meter or net meter. But we're running a guy in Georgia. We're running a irrigation pivot, so that's 200 horsepower, about a hectare total, solar panels, and so then you don't have to screw around with interconnection.
Fantastic. And another person you might also want to speak to is Clark Frost at Heathcote Holdings, because he was a mechanical installer at Cleve Hill Solar Farm, and he's the one that did the structures at 5 in Portrait. And they are in the agri business. Their main business is agriculture. They've got a couple of hundred people in the UK. If you haven't got the time to listen to the podcast, you can look at the transcripts and you'll see everything. So I'll send
Yeah.
you Clark's details as well. There's a couple of his colleagues did a podcast with me. I still need to produce and send out there because I want to just check any bits that we need to not broadcast. But I've certainly enjoyed this conversation. I think you are more about action than talking. You can just tell that in your demeanor. And thanks very much for joining us today, Doug. Have you got any questions for me before we hang up for today?
No, it's a pleasure. I learned a ton. It is Vikram. And I'm just glad I'm able to do this with you.
Fantastic. I'm not going anywhere, so I would love to speak with you again, and I'll send you a few emails.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Doug. Cheers.
See you.